So as we get started, I just want to start with a disclaimer. What a way to start a message by saying, here's a disclaimer. Several years ago, the band U2, they had a documentary, and it was called It Might Get Loud. And so if I had my own way of phrasing that as it relates to today's message, I would say it might get messy. And the reason I say that is I don't feel like I'm preaching a message today. I feel like I'm going to try to paint a picture. And though I don't call myself an artist, I have done art in the past, and every time I do art, it gets messy. I sling paint everywhere. What ends up on the canvas ends up, looking like it made, like there was a purpose to it. But then if you look beyond the canvas, you're like, oh my goodness, this is going to take a while to clean up. So with that being said, it might get messy today as I try to paint a picture of something that's kind of a little abstract and a little bit all over the place. So let's jump in. So you've been in this series, it's been called Awaken. This idea of waking up. It says in the graphic at the bottom, it says, don't press snooze. And I just got to thinking about this idea of waking up. And so all these just kind of thoughts, memories, et cetera, just started floating into my head. One that crossed my mind was being a camp counselor. And one of the best parts of being a camp counselor is waking kids up. Maybe you've been to camp as a kid, or maybe you've been to camp as a counselor. If you have, you know what I mean. You wake up and it's just like, what can we do that is extremely obnoxious today? That causes kids to for just the next 3 minutes, hate us so we can make them love us the rest of the day. I got to thinking about that. I remember doing that to kids as a camp counselor. But I also remember thinking, man, I wonder what's going through these kids' head right now. I also was thinking about how my kids, their first week of school, a couple years ago, it was their first week of school, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna take a speaker, I'm gonna put it in the hallway, and I'm gonna blast the Harry Potter soundtrack through the hallways, and I'm just gonna crank it as loud as I can, and just wake them up with energy. Instead, it was like, Dad, stop! Turn it off, I'm not ready to get up. I also think about this one, and this is the one that still, just thinking about makes me personally kind of twitch, having a newborn. I still have PTSD. My youngest is 10, and there are still these moments where I will hear something. It's no longer a cry, but it's something that I'm like, it just takes me back to those early days where I'm like, sleep does not exist. And I also think about people in my life who are morning people. Y'all got any morning people? Chris and I have a friend. He's actually spoken here probably as much as I have. His name's Jeremy Self. I'm calling him out. His name's Jeremy Self, and he is a morning person. I've known him a long time. This guy literally wakes up in the morning with Zig Ziglar and John Maxwell quotes in his head. I've never watched him wake up, but I just imagine him kind of being like, it's gonna be a great day. I think about, you've seen the movie Groundhog Day? You remember there's a guy in Groundhog Day, his name's Ned Ryerson, and how Phil's walking across the road and this guy says, Phil, it's Ned. And he's got this look on his face, and I'm like, that's Jeremy Self in the morning. And several days into Groundhog Day, he punches him in the face. And I'm like, sometimes I've wanted to do that to one of my best friends. Because it's like, come on, step back a notch. Now here's a thought related to waking up. A question. What's worse? Waking up before you're ready. Now you'd say, well, that's every day. No. I'm talking about when something wakes you up and you know as soon as you look at the clock, I've got 8 more minutes. That moment. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like, I need those 8 more minutes. Or maybe let's just step it back a notch. Maybe this was the morning you were going to be able to sleep in. And it's 2 hours. That moment of just, no, it should not be this way. Okay, what's worse, that or waking up to, oh my goodness, I missed it. I missed it. What's worse? Man, they're both bad. And as I think about the topic today, I feel a little bit of both related to the topic today. There's a part of me that just wants to go back to bed and not face some things. There's another part of me that's going, man, but what if I miss it? What if I miss something that I got to be a part of? Let me explain. As Chris just said, we've been helping them. Our company's been helping you guys behind the scenes for a while. And as we were talking, he said, hey, it'd probably be great if you came and spoke maybe the first of the year. And I was like, hey, whatever we can do for you, however we can help, however we can serve. I love being there. I love being with your people. And he said, how about, and we were on a phone call. I was on a phone call with he and Janet. And I was on the phone call. He goes, how about you do the week that we talk about the church? And I said, Chris, I don't think you want me to do that. Because what y'all don't know is for the past few years, I and my family have kind of been walking out of some hurt related to church. And my thoughts and my feelings related to the local church are not always positive. They're not always Ned Ryerson. And so I was like, maybe I should take a different topic. I don't know if I'm going to be able to serve you well as it relates to that. And then the next day, I'm sitting at my desk and a song comes on Spotify, and a song that I'd never really noticed before, and it comes on and it's playing, and the meaning of this song, the thoughts of this song get me going. I start crying. And I'm like, and I start thinking about A2, and I start thinking about some of the things that I've been talking to Chris and Janet about, and I thought, I may not be able to come in and give you guys this theological thesis related to the church, but I can talk to you as someone who's just about given up on church. And I can come in and not be a pastor, but be a guy that knows what it feels like to almost give up on church, to be right there between not wanting to wake up and scared I'm going to miss something. And so let's look at the A2 vision statement. We are a church for people who've given up on church. And I got to thinking about that, and I said, maybe I can say something related to that. You see, for me, it's not until recently that statement even meant anything to me. I grew up in the church. I'm one of those that they use the cliche, I cut my teeth on the church pew. I probably literally did growing up in a church that had wooden pews. That was me. I was the kid that missed football practice to go to church on Wednesday night. I was always a part of the church team. And so for me, I would look at that statement and go, that doesn't really apply to me. Until recently. And as a matter of fact, he just mentioned how I helped with the logo back when y'all were first starting the church. Well, they were forming this vision back then, and I'll be honest with you, I was on staff at a church at that time, or something of the sort, and I remember looking at that phrase, and I was a little bit cynical. I looked at that phrase as someone that was, I was a professional church guy, and so I knew all the trends. I knew all the fads. I knew everything related to church because that was what I lived and breathed. And I remember looking at that statement and going, oh, I know what that statement is. That is their seeker-friendly statement. Because back then, that was the phrase you used all the time, seeker-friendly. Oh, I know what that statement means. That is their way of saying, at our church, we wear jeans, we drink coffee, and we play rock and roll music. That's their statement for that. That is their, we are a church for the unchurched statement. That's the way I was 10 years ago when I looked at that statement. I didn't think it was a bad statement. Everybody had one. It was kind of like what you had to have if you were going to be that kind of church. What I didn't quite grasp was the group that was forming that statement, particularly even the leader, Chris and Janet. They actually knew what that statement meant because they had come out of their own hurt. I couldn't relate back then, but I can now. And so I look at it differently. And as a matter of fact, as I look at that statement, I emailed Chris a few weeks ago or a few months ago as we were working through some of the stuff. You notice, if you have this, You notice how it's on 4 lines. It's not on 2 like that. That's purposeful. I emailed him. I said, Chris, I'm looking at your vision statement. Have you ever noticed that it's actually 4 statements in one? And then I kind of just put it in the notes of my email, and he responded back, and he said, I haven't, ... all caps, but I have now. And so we're going to walk through these 4 statements in one and hopefully paint a picture of what this church is all about. First statement, we are a church, period. We are a church. I love this. When Jesus is talking to Peter, he says, my Father in heaven, God himself let you in on this secret of who I really am. And now I'm going to tell you who you really are. You are Peter, a rock. And he goes on. And he says, this is the rock on which I will put together my church. I just want to pause right there. I am not a Greek scholar. I don't know a lick of Greek. But I am able to go to Google and put in interlinear Bible. And I'm able to see the word for word of the Greek and how it's laid out, and even the tenses related to how these words actually are existing in the text. And that phrase, put together my church. You know what it says when you look in the interlinear Bible? It says, I am home building my called out. You get that? It's not I'm going to build or I have built. It is in the present. It is in the now. It is in whatever, whether it was 2,000 years ago or whether it's this 2020. He is saying, I am home building my called out. And I love that. This idea of it happening. It's not over. And he says, This is the rock on which I will put together my church, a church so expansive with energy. That's cool. So expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out. I was thinking about the picture that comes in my mind. Back at Christmas, y'all actually kind of covered this movie. The picture that comes in my mind is the Polar Express in that train. I love how that train is all over the place. And I love how throughout the whole movie, you have this moment after moment after moment of, I don't think it's going to get there, but it has to. And at the same time as you're saying this train ain't going to make it, you know it will. And when I think about the church and I look at our tattered history, and I look at the bad decisions the church has made, I'm talking big C. The bad decisions the church has made. When I look at the hurt that has happened, when I look at all of that, I'm like, man, but somehow, as it weaves through, Jesus is still calling us out, and he is still home building us, and he is still at work, and nothing is going to stop that. We are a church, and though sometimes our train goes all over the place, we know it's going to get where it's going, and we're a part of it. So we are a church. That's the first thing. The second one, we are a church for people. Now let me just be clear. This is not the same as saying we are a church for people as opposed to we are not a church for cats. Or we are a church for people as opposed to we are not a church for Green Bay Packer fans. You see what I'm saying? Like that's not what we're getting at when we say this. What we're saying is just like what he just mentioned in this book, know what you're for. We are for people. In a world where there are so many things to be against, in a world where there are so many things to be divided on, in a world where there are so many opinions, in a world where there are so many people that think they're right, which means everybody else is wrong, we are for people. We are a church that is for people. I've been thinking a lot about this. I think back to Genesis, to the creation, to the origin story, my origin story and your origin story. Everybody's got an origin story, right? Your company has an origin story. Your family has an origin story, and on and on and on. We all have an origin story. And you know what our origin story is? We forget this. Our origin story is we were made in the likeness of God. And every single person you come in contact with was also made in the likeness of God. And we need to treat them like they were. A church that is for people. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what you've done. I'm for you. We are a church for people. Let's go on to number 3. We are a church for people who've given up. Man, so see why it's on 4 lines on the front of the guide? Because it's 4 statements. We are a church. We are a church for people, and we're a church for people who've given up. Let's just put a period there for a minute. Man, and just think about when you've given up. Think about people in your life and in your neighborhood and your family who have given up. That's who we're for. And are we living like we are? That's that part of me, right? That part of me that wants to go to bed and is scared I'm missing something at the same time. A church for people who have given up. And I was looking and I came across this passage out of Romans 12, and in the Message version, it almost reads like 10 characteristics of a church who've given up, for people who've given up. Let's pull this up. In Romans 12, 9 through 15, it reads in the Message version. Now, he doesn't have 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, but there are 10 things that I barely even changed in the Message version that says 10 characteristics of a church for people who have given up. Let's read these. I'll read them. Y'all don't have to read them out loud. I'll read them. Number 1, they love from the center of who they are. They love from the center. Some people were telling me in the first service that some of the small groups, or one of the small groups, is reading Bob Goff's Love Does. And they were getting excited as we were going through this because it was aligning with what they're talking about in their group and what they're actually doing in the community. They are loving from the center of who they are. Number 2, a church for people who've given up isn't fake. Number 3, they run for dear life from evil and hold on for dear life to good. They are good friends who love deeply. I love this one. They practice playing second fiddle. They don't quit in hard times. They help those in need. They laugh with those who are happy, and they share tears with those who are down. They make friends with nobodies. And I look at that and I'm like, man, that's what I want to do. That's the kind of church I want to be a part of. A church that lives that. Number 4, the 4th statement in one, and it brings it all together. We are a church for people who've given up on church. And I want to talk about this for a minute. And I was thinking about just these 3 words, and I got to thinking, I was like, all 3 of these words, it's actually 4 in a way, one being a positive, the other 3 being negative, but all 3 of these words have the word miss, M-I-S-S, have the word miss in it. And then I was like, so does mission. And I was like, man, a church for people who have given up on church, they don't miss the mission. And so I want to talk about these 3 words. This is, to me, 3 things that do not happen. These 3 things do not happen in a church for people who've given up on church. These 3 things don't happen, but the truth is, you look around the world and you see us in the church. Because we're not perfect, you see us in the church. You see these 3 things happening. But a church for people who've given up on church is a church who says, we're committed to not letting that happen here. The first one is the word miss. Look at the definition of miss. Fail to notice. Man. Fail to notice. We did a kind of a workshop last Wednesday, and we were talking about what does it look like to to be someone who's given up on church. And one of the people in the room said, I was that person. They said, I was that person. I felt like I was someone who had given up on church. They even went on to say, the reason I showed up here the first time was because of that statement on the website. And then when they started to describe how they felt, you know what they said? They said, I felt invisible. Whew. Fail to notice. What's the remedy? Awareness. It's being aware of the people that are walking through the door and letting them know you're aware of them. It's seeing them. Letting them know that you see them. And I just want to point something out. The word miss can also be defined as a woman who's not married, who's single. And I don't want to get theological about things, but a lot of times, a single woman feels invisible. And a church for people who've given up on church, make sure that doesn't happen. And I want to say one other thing related to this was I think about women. I hear and I see debates related to women in the church, leadership, their role in the church, yada, yada, yada. And look, I'm not a pastor anymore. So I get to dismiss myself from that conversation. But I do want to say this. So often, the arguments I hear, at the end of the argument, my response is, it still sounds like you're saying women are less. And a church for people who've given up on church, make sure everyone is valued to the level that they should be. Y'all figure that out. You're welcome. So the remedy is awareness. The next word, remiss. Sometimes we do this. To lack care. Remiss. To lack care. What does this look like in a church for people who have given up on church? I want to show you a post that I saw recently on Facebook. Hey, y'all might know that guy. His name's Chris Goins. And he posted this. He said, everyone is fighting a private battle you know nothing about. Be liberal with grace, extravagant with love, and always ready to forgive. That's empathy. That's going, I don't know your private battle, but I know you have one. And I want you to know that I'm here and I want to understand. And if I can't understand, I'm still not going anywhere. Let's not lack care. Let's not remiss. Third word, dismiss. Whew. You hear people say this. I just felt like the church dismissed me. In other words, to treat as unworthy. Look at these two phrases. I tried to make them cute, but they're not quite cute. Don't throw shade on the jaded. Again, I remember being a pastor on staff, and I would have people come into our doors, and I lacked empathy, and I lacked awareness from where they were coming from. And I would just go, oh, they've got one of those sob stories about a church that hurt them, and they're just jaded. They're jaded because stuff happened to them. Yes. And they're jaded because their resentment has roots. It comes from somewhere. And a church for people who've given up on church is a church who says, we're not going to dismiss them because we're for them. And I've heard story after story after story of this church being that kind of church that does not dismiss people. And it's beautiful. And that's what it's about. And that's a church that I go, man, maybe this dream of God, this dream that Jesus had, that when he was talking about his church, maybe it is still alive. The remedy is permission. Permission to be me. Permission to come through these doors with everything that I have going on and not try to be somebody else when I cross the threshold. Permission to have questions. Permission to not line up theologically with you. Permission to have a past. And I got to thinking about it. Is this biblical? Is this the way Jesus was? So I started looking, and let's look at this list. Pull up that next slide. There we go. I got to thinking about this. Check this out. 10 different people in the Gospels that asked for permission. And what was Jesus' response? The first one, Nicodemus. What if I need to talk to you on my terms? Jesus said, I'll meet you on the roof. Woman at the well, what if you should pass me by? Jesus said, I'm going to stop and have a conversation, when really I could go another way. It was actually inconvenient to come through your town. Man with leprosy, what if I'm untouchable and I should be outside of the city? Jesus says, stretch out your hand and let me touch it. Woman caught in sin, what if I have a reputation? Jesus says, hey, look around. Do you see your accusers? She says, no, I don't. He says, get up and go and have a changed life. Father of a mute boy, he says, Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. What if I lack faith? Jesus says, I'm healing your son today. Peter, what if I deny you? Jesus says, I love you. Zacchaeus, what if I mistreated people? Jesus says, I'm coming to your house. Thomas, what if I have questions? Jesus says, do you see this? Stick your hand in there. The soldier at the cross, what if the hammer is actually in my hand? Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And the criminal on the cross, Jesus, what if my sentence is death? Today you will be with me in paradise. You get it? Jesus gave permission over and over and over again. And so what does this look like? Remember how I said I want to paint a picture. So I'm going to try to close by painting a picture with some stories. It's going to be a little abstract. But my hope is that the spirit that Jesus told these stories with will come through and be crystal clear. And I'm going to start with the parable of the sower. I mentioned at the beginning of this message, I said I was sitting at my desk and a song came on, and I started to cry as I thought about what does this look like in the church and how we so often don't see it. And I also got to thinking, man, I've never quite looked at God this way in this parable. So I want to look at it together. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path. This is the part that I'd never really focused on. I always jump to the end of the parable. Some fell among the path. It was trampled on, and the birds ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, and when it came up, the plants withered because they had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up and yielded a crop 100 times more than was sown. I don't know about y'all, I jump to the end and I get focused on being good soil and all of that side of it. And you know what? That's valid. That's the thing that's beautiful about parables. There's so many meanings. But I was listening to this song and I looked at this parable in a way I've never looked at it. The farmer, he spread seed all over the place. He said the rocks. He said the road. He said the weeds. He just went out. He spread it everywhere. And what's the seed? It's the love of Christ. And the farmer said, I'm letting it out. I'm not just going to go find the soil and drop it. I'm taking the seed and it's going everywhere. And the seed's going to fall wherever it falls because that's the kind of God I am. Look at the lyrics to this song, John Mark McMillan. The road, the rocks, and the weeds. He's contrasting God with the gods of Mount Olympus in Greek culture. And he says, come down from your mountain, your high-rise apartment, and tell me of the God you know who bleeds. And tell me what to tell my daughter when she asks so many questions. And I fail to fill her heaviness with peace. When I've got no answers for her needs or cancers, except for a Savior who suffers them with me, I'm going to sing Goodbye, Olympus, because the heart of my Maker is spread out on the rocks, the road, and the weeds. And I just caught that picture, and it got in my spirit, and I said, that's what the church needs to be doing. Saying we're going to love people and let the seed fall where they may. And so then I got to thinking about some other parables. I got to think about these parables, and I'm just going to paraphrase them real quick. We know the three parables out of Luke chapter 15, where he's telling this story. Jesus is telling these stories of three different people who have lost something. And he starts with a shepherd, and he says the shepherd has 99 sheep and loses one. He says, what does he do? He leaves the 99 and he goes out into the wild looking for that sheep. And we listen to that story and we read that story and it gets us, right? The next story is a story of a woman who lost a coin. She had 10, she lost one. And she goes looking for it. And the Bible says that she lights a lamp and that she grabs a broom and she starts searching. And she's looking for this. And in each story, they find what they're looking for. The last story is the story of the lost son. A man had 2 sons and one leaves. And he goes and he has crazy living, and then he realizes, why am I doing this? And he starts to come back home and he gets this thought in his head. He says, I know my dad probably won't accept me as I am, so I'm going to go ahead and just go there before my dad does. And I'm going to say, I don't need to be your son anymore. I'm not asking to be your son anymore. Just make me a servant. But we know in the story that Jesus tells that it says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. And we know that his father's not going to see him when he's still a long way off, unless he's looking for him. And when he gets there, he celebrates and throws a robe around him and says, hey, this is my son who was lost and is now found. And we know that those stories. If you've been a part of the church for any length of time, you've heard those stories. Maybe if you haven't been a part of the church, you've heard them because they're pretty famous. And I look at those stories and I go, what's our place in that story? And so I want to close with this visual. So what is our place in each of those stories as a church for people who have given up on church? What does it look like to be in that story? Because I think a lot of times we look at the parables and we go, well, who am I in the story? I want to look at the parables and go, I'm not in the story, but I want to be. And if I enter the story, at what place do I enter the story? So I asked Nathan to come help me. Nathan, grab a staff. We're going to start with the first story. You're going to be a shepherd. And I'm going to move this. So I look at this story, and as we enter the story, here's what I imagine. I come up, I say, hey, where are you going? Looking for... I just can't, but you have 99. Okay, you've got 99. There's one out there. You care about that sheep. You know that's going to be a rough road. Can you wait just a second? All right, let's go. You see, that's a church for people who've given up on church. A church for people that give up on church says that story needs another staff. And it's going to be us. All right, 1 second. Be right back. And flip this. Have you ever seen the American Gothic? He's got to hold it that way. I'm sorry. All right, so with this story, I always think of it this way, because this woman's in her house, right? She's in her house, and she's searching. And I just imagine this little old lady, this coin's so valuable to her, she's looking for it. She doesn't even know her neighbors because she's quiet. I don't know, I'm making this up. It's not in the Bible, don't go looking for it. So she's in the house, and she's searching. I just imagine it this way. And I'm like, she's searching. Then all of a sudden, there's a knock at the door. And every time I read that story, I always imagine a knock at the door. And she comes and she opens the door. And there's her neighbors. And they look at her, him, and they say, I hear you lost a coin. I heard it was valuable to you. I heard you have to find it. I heard it's got to happen. You know what? I think we can find it. I brought a broom. I brought a lamp. Let's go. Right? Right? And then when I imagine this story of the man with the lost son, I always picture this dad on his front porch. Every day. He goes out at the end of the day at sunset, and he sits every day, day after day after day after day, because he hasn't given up hope. And I just imagine this dad. And then I imagine we enter the story and we go, hey, what you doing? You waiting on your son? You been doing that a while? You been doing that a while? He's lost. I'm coming. Can I join you? I know you didn't invite me. Can I sit with you? Can I look? Yeah, let's do it. All right, so when you see him, you let me know, because I'm leaping off this porch. I'll beat you to him. Right? Right? Thanks, man. Appreciate it. A church for people who've given up on church says, hey, we're going to bring another staff to the story. They say, we're going to bring another hand to the hunt. And we're going to put a little more rock and roll in the waiting. That's a church for people who've given up on church. And so my hope is that somehow this abstract thing that you'll see two chairs, you'll see two brooms, two lamps, and two staff, and you'll say, I've got mine, let's go. Close this way. What's next? I lost my notes when I moved everything. The band can come up if they would like. Oh, here we go. So I thought of it this way. What do we do next? We give. We forgive. We fail. We hope. We cry, we laugh, we serve, we hug, we sacrifice, we listen, we smile, we sit when someone needs us to sit with them. We stand when somebody needs us to stand with them. We mourn, we bleed, we encourage, we challenge, we're going to disappoint, we defend. We try again, and we try again. We dream, we expect, we breathe, we sing, we shout, we fight, and we dance. And we let the seed fall where they may. We live in the beauty. We embrace the mess. And we share the love. Because we are a church for people who've given up and who have given up on church. There's two staff, there's two brooms, and there's two chairs. I was sitting at breakfast this morning. I found out the hard way that the water heater was broken at our hotel. Cold shower. And I go to breakfast, and I'm sitting beside this guy, and he reaches out, and he says, hey, how you doing? I said, I'm good. How was that cold shower? And he says, oh, wait a minute. And about the time I say that, the other people that were sitting there at breakfast say, oh, you too? And then this guy beside of me says, oh, I thought there was just something wrong with me. He said, it is good to know that we're all in this together. The other day, one of our kids had this moment of attitude, and as we put our kid to bed, he was just kind of beating himself up. because he didn't like the way he had acted. And I told him, I said, man, I just turned 42 and I still act that way. And my wife said, we're all on the hot mess train. And then I said, you know what? Jesus is the conductor and the caboose. Hey, look, I asked Chris what this kind of church, what's going to happen and what is happening when a church commits to this. And he said, it's going to be messy. So I'll close the way I started with a disclaimer. A2 Church, it might get messy. Thanks.